Desired configuration management. All right, in this nugget, we're going to talk about something that's not necessarily completely new with Configuration Manager. This was released back with SMS 2003 as an optional add-on pack, but it is sort of a neat new way that you can take a look at the configurations in your environment and let yourself know when certain configurations are not up to snuff. If you have applications or if you have security configurations or if you have mandates from your organization or compliance or your security department, any of which that say your machines must follow a certain baseline, and you need some way of managing that baseline and seeing when your computers are at or not at that baseline, Desired Configuration Management is a mechanism that allows you to do just that. Desired Configuration Management really uses the client, the Configuration Manager client, to look at the machine, to look at specific configurations on that machine, whether they be operating system or files or folders or registry keys or even things inside of Active Directory, to look at those, to repeatedly analyze those across the whole period of time, from the time you set it up and as long as you keep it enabled. And when those configurations go out of spec and away from that baseline, then report on that and reduce your level of compliance. What this gives you is the ability to see across all the machines in your environment which ones are correctly configured so that they support your baseline. Now, in order to do this, we have a number of different elements that we have to put together. As we always start with the client agent, we need to make sure we have that client agent enabled. And we have what are called baselines and configuration items. And we'll talk about in this nugget how to create a baseline and how to create individual configuration items that are more or less the elements that you're attempting to monitor inside of your configuration. And then once we have those, we can use reports to see what our compliance is with that configuration item. There are ways that you can create your own configuration items, and there are also pre-configured baselines available on the internet that do things like check for security statistics and check for the correct configuration of your configuration manager server and all kinds of different things that are already pre-configured for you as a good starting point. In this nugget, we will show you the process of importing in those pre-configured baselines as well as how to create your own. So let's actually start by minimizing this and going back to our old Configuration Manager console here. You'll see that we've highlighted the Desired Configuration Management node here inside of our tree, but the very first thing we have to do is go back to our old friend Client Agents and just make sure that the Desired Configuration Management Client Agent is actually enabled and ready for use. In order for our clients to actually begin scanning themselves for configuration and compliance to those configurations, we need to make sure that we have enabled the Client Agent to be able to do that. Right now, we are running that agent every 7 days. So every 7 days, the data is going to push back from that client back up to the server with information about configuration management. But again, just like before, we can reduce this as necessary to suit our needs inside of our environment. So as long as that client agent is enabled, we will then be able to, at the client side, begin processing the elements that we set up here inside Desired Configuration Management. Now, the next thing that we need to do is actually identify the configuration that is of interest to us, the configuration that we really want to watch for inside of our environment. Maybe we have, again, maybe it's a security configuration. We want to make sure that our Active Directory is configured in a certain way so that it supports security requirements. Maybe we have an application configuration that we want to make sure, because when an application is not configured properly, it breaks, and we know that it breaks, and we want to make sure that we can proactively solve those problems before they occur on the part of our users. Or maybe we just want to make sure that our environment, our desktops have a particular configuration, maybe their desktop or environment variables or their registry settings or any of those elements inside of the desktops, because when those go out of compliance, then we know that we just have problems and that we have to solve through some mechanism. Now, I will tell you that Desired Configuration Management, at least in this version of Configuration Manager, does not support the ability to remediate the change, to fix the changes that it finds. What it does support, however, is notifying you when those changes are out of spec. So in our case, let's actually take a look at an application that we talked about before. Back up here under Software Distribution, we've already packaged up a package here for Adobe Acrobat. And we've already deployed this in our example. Let's say we've deployed this out to our environment and we have it configured in our environment. People are using Acrobat successfully, but we know that in some cases, when Acrobat is in the environment, if we don't have a particular registry registry key set appropriately, that registry key does not function correctly. That Acrobat has some problems and doesn't function the way it's supposed to necessarily. And we've done a little digging. We found out, and I'm going to bring up a piece of notepad here, we found out that the registry key that tends to cause the problem is here under local machine, and it's in the Adobe Acrobat Reader location for optimization. And we need to make sure that this optimization key is set to yes, the enabled bit is set to yes, or Acrobat has problems. So this is the example we're going to use here to watch, to have desired configuration management, watch for this registry key, and when this registry key is not set to yes, it's going to alert us. In order for us to do this, the first thing we need to create actually is a configuration item. The configuration item will be the registry key that we're attempting to monitor. If we right-click configuration items, you'll see that we have a number of different items that we can actually create. One related to applications, general configuration items, or operating system configuration items. The one that we're looking for is an application configuration item. So let's go ahead and create a new application configuration item here. You'll see that we create a new wizard here, and we're creating a new configuration item with a name here. Maybe we want to call this, instead of new application configuration item, we want to call it Adobe Acrobat Optimization. And we can give it a category as well. We can choose that category: client, IT infrastructure, line of business, server. These are the default categories that are available to us. Maybe we can create a new category that relates to maybe the application that we're trying to monitor. Maybe in this case we'll just look at client as the available category. We can use this for later sorting because, as you can see, with individual registry keys and individual files and folders that we're looking to monitor, there can be a very large number of configuration items that we actually need to monitor, and sorting those by categories will help us a lot out in the future. So I click OK here, and we click Next to move to the next screen. We have the ability to detect whether or not the application is installed. And this helps us because in some cases we may not have actually targeted Adobe Acrobat onto certain systems. And we may not really care if Acrobat is not installed on that system, whether or not it's configured appropriately. And so, as we'll find out when we talk about the baselines, we want to make sure that when we're doing something that is an optional component on a system, that we look to see that it actually is installed in the first place. And so you'll see here we can choose how to determine whether the application is installed on a client. We can either always assume that it's installed. We can use an MSI detection mechanism, whereas we look for that MSI on the client, or we can use a custom script that we use to that we write ourselves in order to identify whether or not that application is installed on the client. In our case, we can use a Windows installer detection mechanism for us to determine whether or not that application is installed. And as you'll see, if I go down here to Start, Run, and then move to C Source Files, which is the location where that we've stored the Adobe Acrobat source files, I've actually unpacked this exe file that we've created and brought out just the MSI file that's actually buried inside of the exe. This MSI file is actually stored on each client as it gets installed. And so what we can do actually is close this down and go back to Open and actually go to our source files and point it at that MSI file, and it will interrogate the MSI file and look for that product code and version. This makes it very, very easy for Configuration Manager, and also for us as we manage it, to identify if that installer, if that application has been installed on the client, and also what version that application has been installed to. If it's been installed per machine, we can do that this way, or if it's been installed per user, we can check this box. Once we're ready and once we're sure that we've got it complete, we can choose the next button. At this point, we have two different tests that we can perform against that registry key. Here under Objects, we have the ability to test whether or not the key actually exists. We can test for presence of the key, and if the key does not exist at all, then we know that we've got a problem, then we know that we're not meeting our baseline. Later, under Settings, we can test the actual setting of the registry key and verify that that setting is indeed correct as well. Let's actually show you how both of these work. First of all, here under Objects, the first thing we want to create is a new object, and we can create a new either assembly, a new file or folder to test for presence or absence of a file or folder, or presence or absence of an individual registry key. In our case, let's choose registry key, and in here we want to choose the actual registry key that we want to test for its presence. In this case, we have the available hives, HKey local machine, or all of the other available registry hives to us, HKey users, HKey current user, current config, classes root, for example. In our case, this key actually comes from HKey local machine, and we need to paste in the key here that we're interested in looking for. Here's Software Adobe Acrobat Reader 8.0 Installer Optimization. We can see whether or not this registry key is associated associated with a 64-bit application. In our case, it's not. And if the key does not exist, then we will choose to mark this as information level error. We can choose a number of severity levels as well, whether there's no Windows event message, an information error, a warning error, or actually an actual error. In our case, this may be a warning error because we know if the registry key doesn't exist, but Adobe Acrobat is installed, then we know we've definitely got a problem associated with the configuration of Adobe Acrobat. We have a permissions tab up here, which we won't talk about just yet because we'll talk about permissions in a later nugget, but we can choose the permissions associated with that register key as well. Back into the General tab, this is going to test for the presence or absence of that optimization key. Now, in addition to verifying the presence or absence of the key itself, we also want to check to make sure that it's configured properly. And we do this through the Settings node here. I'm going to click Next and bring us to the Settings node. And at this point, what we want to do is we want to create a new configuration item that's going to test for the value of that setting. You'll see down here, if I click under New, I have the ability to check for different elements, like Active Directory domain services configuration, maybe if I have an IIS server, the metabase, a registry key, a script, a SQL, or a HOOCL query, or even an XML. We can, in this case, we're looking for a registry key. And so if we click on the registry key entry here, what we're going to do is we're going to test to see if that enabled value is equal to yes. If I bring up my little notepad here, you'll remember that what we're looking for here is this key for the optimization key, and the value, the reg string value of enabled, equal to the 3-character letter yes. And when we know when that equals yes, we know that we have the correct configuration for our value, for our Adobe Acrobat instance. So in our case, let's create a display name, Adobe Acrobat Optimization. And in other words, we have the same Hive HE local machine, and the key that we want to paste in is the same key as before. In this case, the value name is enabled. Again, we're looking for enabled equals yes. We have the ability to use .NET regular expressions to help us further target down that value name if we want, but in this case, this isn't the case. And we have the ability, again, to choose whether or not this is associated with a 64-bit application. We need to validate that key, the value associated with that key as well. And what we're looking for here is a string data type. We're looking, again, for the string data type equals to yes. We have the ability to choose date, time, integer, floating point, and version is what sort of validation we're looking for. In our case, let's choose new, and we're going to create equals to yes. That's all we're looking for. We want to make sure that that is equal to yes, and if it is not equal to yes, we want to pop a warning error if it is not compliant with the value yes. I choose OK here, and you'll see that we now have the details associated with this. And again, when the severity is not there, we want to make sure that we're going to pop a warning message because we want to ensure that that key is set appropriately. I'm going to click OK here, and as you can see, we now have a setting that is inside our configuration item that relates to the key that we're looking for. If I choose the next button here, you'll see that we can validate this against multiple different platforms. We can choose against all Windows platforms or any specific Windows platform. So if we have Adobe Acrobat that's installed on 32-bit systems, for example, we can just check those. If we want to check just 64-bit systems, we can check those, or various levels of the Windows operating system from Windows Vista all the way down to Windows 2000. We can do that here within this screen. But what we're looking for here is where it's installed, no matter where it's installed in the case of this configuration item, so we'll choose all Windows platforms. If we choose the next button here, we have a summary page, and it's going to create our configuration item. If we've done everything correctly, once this configuration item is created, then we'll end up with the green checkbox. You'll see here we have the green checkbox. It looks like we've successfully created this configuration item. And if we close this down, you'll see that we now have a configuration item version for this Adobe Acrobat optimization key. Once we've completed our configuration item, we need to take that configuration item and add it into a baseline. Now, as you'll see, there are a lot of different elements that can go into an individual configuration item. And there are different configuration items that can go into different configuration baselines. And the baseline is actually sort of the boundary of the scan for looking for a particular configuration and then the compliance with a particular configuration. The idea here is if you have a baseline that shows these applications need to be installed, these operating system characteristics, these configurations of these applications, you can create a single baseline, and within that baseline will happen multiple configuration items that relate to the baseline. In this case, we're doing a very simple example, and so what we need to do is create a new configuration baseline by right-clicking configuration baselines and choosing new configuration baseline. We can give it a name here. Maybe this is Adobe Acrobat Compliance. and then the date associated with that. We can choose a category as well, client, IT infrastructure. These are all the default categories that are available to us. Maybe this is a client baseline, for example. If we choose the next button, then we can choose which of the configuration items and which of the elements should go in this baseline. Now, this is very, very important. When we look at this baseline, we are going to validate the compliance against this baseline based off of a set of rules. The rules here allow us to choose one of the following operating system configuration items. We saw those earlier. These applications and general configuration items now are required and must be properly configured for us to be compliant. Also, some optional application configuration items are detected. They must be properly configured. If you remember back, we want this Adobe Acrobat to be correctly configured, but only if Adobe Acrobat is installed. And so this may be an optional application because Adobe Acrobat may not be installed in all places on our network. However, if it is installed, it must be properly configured. In that case, let's go ahead and click here and add the Adobe Acrobat optimization configuration item that we created to this configuration baseline. I click OK here, and you'll see that that item is now related to this baseline. We can choose if software updates are present. Maybe we want to make sure that certain software updates from our WSUS infrastructure are also as part of this configuration baseline for us to be compliant. Maybe we have other application configuration items that must not be present, or other baselines entirely that also must be validated for us to be compliant according to this baseline. So you think about it. You can have a number of different items that relate to a baseline, and then a number of different baselines that relate to another baseline, which makes the process of creating and managing these a little easier because you only ever have to do anything at one time. So we're going to just choose this single item here, Adobe Acrobat Optimization. This is a single configuration item that we want to apply to our baseline. If I choose Next here, it's going to create this actual baseline with that configuration item in it. You'll see here that we're going through the progress screen, and we see the green checkbox. The last step in this process is applying that configuration baseline to a collection of computers. Once we've identified what we want to monitor, what sort of configuration we want to align our compliance with, then we need to take that configuration baseline and apply it to the computers that we're interested in looking after. And so we do that actually by going down to the configuration baseline that we're interested in, right-clicking, and choosing to assign that to a particular collection. If we assign this configuration baseline to the collection, for example, all systems, because it is an optional configuration baseline, it will only tell us, it will only provide compliance information for us when that attribute, when that Adobe Acrobat is actually installed. So let's actually select this configuration baseline and apply this to the collection of all systems. You'll see now that we are going to validate against the all systems collection that baseline that we've created. And choose Next here. We can choose how often do we want this configuration baseline to be assessed for compliance. Maybe every 7 days, or we can even choose every 7 hours, every 7 minutes, for example, if we're very, very concerned about making sure that that configuration is correct. We can also choose a custom schedule if necessary. We choose Next. We get the summary screen. It's going to create the assignment, and then we're complete. At this point now, our systems are going to, on a regular basis, verify their configuration against the baseline and report that information back up to our Configuration Manager server. Now, as with a lot of stuff in Configuration Manager, this process of rescanning yourself and reporting this information up can actually take an extended period of time. And so we're not going to really see the results of this just yet. It's actually going to take a period of time for these clients to complete their scan process and upload that information to the server. But what I do want to show you is here under the Reporting tab, where you're going to see the results of what we've just created. Under the Reporting tab here under Reports, if we click here, you'll see that there are a number of reports under the category Desired Configuration Management. In fact, there's a whole lot of these reports here. These reports are where we will go to find out, well, what are our clients telling us? How compliant are we? Based on each of these configuration baselines or individual items within the baseline, how compliant are we? If we look at, for example, summary compliance for a collection by configuration baseline, if we run this report, it'll actually give us a little bit of a view of the environment and how, based on those baselines, how are we in terms of compliance within that environment. I want to relate this to a collection ID, for example. In this collection ID, I'm going to relate it to the All Systems collection. And there are a number of different things that I can use to further hone down this report. But if I click the Display button here, you'll see that for this collection, I have one configuration baseline, the one that we just created, that relates to it. Now, in our case, we don't show any data for compliant or non-compliant machines because those machines haven't processed the baseline yet. But what you'll see here over a period of time is the information from those machines about their level of compliance. If we want to drill down to this report, then we can find out more information about the specific compliance, where we are not compliant and where we can resolve compliance once we've got that data here. But what this provides us is a very high level information about the level of compliance in our environment based off of the compliance baseline that we've just created. This allows us to then give to, whether it's our auditors, our security people, or our help desk, or anybody that has the need to make use of this information, to let them understand, well, where are we in relation to compliance? Where are we in relation to security? How secure is our environment? How close is our environment to where we want to be based off of the configuration baselines that we've created and the items that we've created in those baselines? Now, all of this seems really complicated, to be honest. You really have to understand, what are your Active Directory configurations? What is your operating system configurations? What are your registry keys? There's a lot of stuff inside of your computers that you may need to go create items for. You may need to go create different configuration baselines for. But you may be thinking, well, wow, Greg, that's a lot of work for me. Is there any way that I can ingest in some already pre-considered best practices? And well, yes, that is the case. On the Microsoft website, and assuming on other websites as well, third-party websites, Microsoft at least has created a number of configuration packages or config packs that you can download right off their website. One of these is this Config Manager 2007 VA config pack. What this VA config pack is looking for is various best practices associated to vulnerabilities or security inside of your environment. And I've actually downloaded this off of the Microsoft website. This is a free download that includes a number of different configuration items and baselines that will automatically get imported into your environment. I'm going to double click this and click next here, and we're going to install this Config Manager pack to this location, where we will actually use this Config Manager pack to validate against our computers inside of our environment. Once we've done this, we'll actually import in this baseline and use this as a starting point for creating other baselines. After completing the installation, we can actually look to see what we've actually installed on our machine. If we go back to the run key and we paste in the location where we've installed this to, you'll see that we've actually created an HTML file, a doc file, and then a cab file. This cab file is actually the location where those configuration items are stored. And this is the cab file that we'll actually use to import into our Configuration Manager console for all of those settings that we want to add. We'll go ahead and close this down, and I'm going to go back to our Configuration Manager instance. And if we go to Configuration Baselines and we right-click, we can actually import in some configuration data from the location that we just installed this sample pack. I'm going to actually add in this configuration data and go back to my location, which is the configuration management pack, and I'm going to point myself to the cab file that we've just created. We're going to run this software. It's going to import this software into our configuration manager instance. You'll see there it is. We choose next, and it's going to give us all of these configuration items: Internet Explorer, enhanced security configuration information, IIS lockdown, Office macro protection, some SQL Server stuff. You'll see all of these are best practices for these different elements that now we don't have to create for ourselves. We can use this information to create our own baselines. We can choose next here. It's going to import this in, and once it completes, we'll actually be able to make use of this information inside of our console. Now that we've completed, you'll see here under configuration baselines, we have a number of different new baselines. We have an IIS baseline, we have a SQL Server baseline, and we have a Windows baseline. You'll see here under IIS, we have, if IIS is actually installed, these elements must be properly configured. The lockdown tool, logging, domain controller, if IIS installed on the domain controller, parent paths, etc., etc. If we have the Windows baseline, we have a number of different elements as well. These are Internet Explorer enhanced security configuration, non-NTFS file systems, guest account disabling, unnecessary servers, for example. If we go down to our configuration items, you'll see that we have a number of additional configuration items that we can then make use either inside the pre-configured baselines or in creating our own configuration baselines. Let's actually drill down into one of these pre-configured configuration items so we can see what it's actually attempting to do. Here's one called Anonymous User Disabled. This one actually disables the Restrict Anonymous registry setting. It's actually looking for that registry setting and verifying that we are restricting the ability for the anonymous user to actually log onto our systems. We have no objects we're looking for, but we are looking for a particular setting here. If I double click this setting, you'll see that we're verifying that the Restrict Anonymous key down here in the LSA subkey is actually looking for a value of 2. If that value is 2, then we're going to go ahead and say, okay, we are compliant, we are preventing anonymous logons. If it's not 2, then we're going to alert that this is a problem. And so this is an example of one of these security-related pre-configured best practices that we can then import in and just verify against all of the computers in our environment to see what our security posture is. And so really this is the use of the Desired Configuration Manager toolkit within Configuration Manager. It allows us to compare our configuration against the configuration of the desired configuration that we want for our environment. So what have we talked about in this nugget? We've talked about how to enable the client agent. We've talked about the baselines and the configuration items that go into those baselines. We talked about the use of reports and how those reports will show us what the compliance level is for our environment based off of the baselines and configuration items that we've created. And then we've also talked about these pre-configured baselines, which are some great starting points that automatically allow us to very quickly determine what the health is of our environment. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.